modern world, great leaders resolve their conflicts with words. Step launcher. Carbon bomb. Tomahawk missiles.
Welcome to GameSpot Live. I'm Greg Kasavin, here to tell you all about Command & Conquer Generals, the latest and possibly the greatest game in the long-running CNC real-time strategy series. The first CNC game, of course, dates back to 1995, and ever since then, the name Command & Conquer has been synonymous with what real-time strategy means to people. It's this really popular genre of games, and Command & Conquer is what defined it, along with Blizzard's Warcraft 2 way back in the day. Generals definitely holds true to the roots of the series, but makes some surprising departures as well, and at the same time introduces some really impressive new 3D graphics to the mix, and introduces three interesting new factions to the fray, making for what's easily one of the top-tier real-time strategy games, one that's right up there with last year's great Warcraft 3 and Age of Mythology. Generals does have a couple of rough edges, and the die-hard CNC fans may lament a few of the departures that it makes, but still, it's hard to deny that this isn't one of the strongest efforts that the CNC series has ever made, and it really is just a fun, fast-paced game with a lot of cool stuff in it, a lot of excitement and big explosions and stuff like that. So really, if you're a fan of RTS games or just are interested in the subject matter in any way, Generals is really going to impress you. The Command & Conquer series has never been known for its political correctness, and Generals really is no exception. Its fictional premise puts the USA, China, and a terrorist group called the Global Liberation Army, or GLA, at war with each other, presumably sometime in the near future. This may seem like some pretty sensitive subject matter, since the GLA is obviously Middle Eastern, but really the game is so kind of comic booky and silly that it's hard to imagine it really offending anyone's sensibilities. At the same time, there's really no story at all to Generals, which is a bit unfortunate, actually, considering previous CNC games have been so story-driven, but you never really get the sense of why any of these factions are fighting, so they almost seem like kind of toy soldiers going at it, rather than there being some kind of really serious plot at the back of the whole thing. Also, while Generals may have a slightly more realistic appearance to it than the previous CNC RTS game, Red Alert 2, still there are plenty of kind of really weird and crazy imaginative units, in addition to the kind of standard assortment of tanks and infantry and airplanes and stuff like that. This definitely is in the same vein as previous Command & Conquers, where it's just kind of loosely related to realistic military operations, and otherwise is just there, to be a fun time and to give you some entertainment. The three factions, you could easily make a case for how any and all of them are either the coolest or the strongest of the three. They all have lots of unique and powerful units and lots of cool technologies that are exclusive to them. The differences between the three sides are played up really well. The USA is the most high-tech, but its forces are also the most expensive. The USA has the best air force by far, and a lot of weird, sophisticated technologies, like their combat units can spawn little drones to help them fight or to help spy on the enemies. China is really the brute force, strength in numbers side, which has kind of the most direct and powerful units, and can also produce the most of them the most quickly, but it's vulnerable to some of the GLA's kind of methods of subterfuge and some of the GLA's trickier tactics, like how they can spawn tunnel networks around the entire map and really quickly transport their forces around. The GLA comes across as the most kind of tenacious and resilient of the three, and also the most dastardly, because they use lots of biological weapons and nasty stuff like that. Each of the three sides gets its own brief campaign, but as mentioned, there's really no story to tie together the different missions. The missions themselves are cool, though. They rarely involve simply eliminating all the enemies on the map, and often have something more interesting for you to do. And during these campaigns, you really get to mess with all the various units and special abilities you have available. One of the new things in Generals is the notion of general abilities. Basically, as you fight and win battles, you gain experience points that let you earn either new special abilities or unlock new units, and other stuff like that. And the choices you make in choosing between generals' abilities really let you play to different types of strategies, either augmenting one of the strengths of your faction or just gaining an ace up your sleeve. Plus, your actual units gain experience as they score kills and survive battles. And Generals also takes some of Red Alert 2's cool features, like the ability to garrison infantry in just about any civilian structure and all kinds of stuff like that. So usually the battlefield itself plays a key role in the battle. I mentioned before that Generals make some departures from Command & Conquer, and these are kind of more curious than anything else. There used to be these raging debates on the internet between, the CNC crowd and the Warcraft crowd, talking about which game has the better interface and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see after all these years that basically Generals is giving a nod to the Blizzard method. And no longer do you build units from like a right-hand menu. You now just build them directly from the factory by clicking on it first. The interface is now at the bottom of the screen, like in Blizzard games. You use worker units to construct structures, and you don't have to build them adjacent to other structures. You can build them pretty much anywhere. And the fog of war no longer stays revealed once you uncover it. It now works like in a Blizzard game where you only have the line of sight of your units. So all these things definitely fly in the face of Command & Conquer's conventions, but they do add to the strategic interest of Generals, and they do make it a better game as far as I'm concerned. Some of the other changes from previous Command & Conquers I found a bit disappointing. Command & Conquer games were known for their use of full motion video. They had actors like James Earl Jones and Michael Biehn and Udo Kier in there, giving those old guys work. But Generals has no FMV in it at all. As mentioned, there's really no story to speak of. Also, previous Command & Conquer games all had these really flashy, really cool installation procedures. So while you were waiting for the game to install to your hard drive, at least you were looking at something pretty cool and getting briefed on the game. But Generals just has a boring old Electronic Arts installation that takes a really long time. But these aren't things that you'd complain about for any other game, but die-hard CNC fans, as mentioned, might be a bit disappointed to find that these things have occurred. Of course, the gameplay itself is what really counts, and Generals definitely has that going on. It's just paced tightly, it controls well, it moves fast, and it looks really, really great. The particle effects, the special effects like explosions and smoke look really good, and they're accompanied by equally good sound effects. So you just really get the impression that these different tanks and infantry and all that are really pounding into each other. So the game has a real visceral quality to it. Like Red Alert 2, Generals is definitely all about taking the offense. You can't really defend your base all that well. Base defenses won't stand up against a sufficient force, and you can't build walls and stuff like that. And plus, you gain general points, by attacking the enemy. So really, you want to quickly muster your forces and get out there and start fighting. So matches tend to be quick and decisive, and that's great because it means you could, play a bunch of matches rather than play one long, drawn-out match where which might not end in any kind of satisfying fashion. Of course, you could take the action online. For some reason, online play, if you select the quick match option, you're limited to 800 by 600 resolution, but otherwise you can quickly and easily find an opponent to play against. And needless to say, lots and lots of people are going to be playing Generals online for the foreseeable future, and all your stats get tracked and all that kind of stuff. The game ships with a beta version of a world editor if you want to build your own maps, and there's a good skirmish mode and plenty of different maps to choose from if you want to play against the computer. The computer's a total cakewalk on the normal setting, but crank it up to hard or brutal and you'll be in for a much better challenge. Generals does have a few rough edges. One thing that's probably the most notable is that you do need a really powerful system to get it to run smoothly. If you have a less than a top-of-the-line system, you'll probably have to crank down some of the graphical options, although it'll still end up looking really good. In particular, when the action really heats up and when nukes are going off and nice stuff like that, the frame rate tends to take a hit. Other than that, there's the occasional issue with pathfinding. Sometimes your units won't respond when they're getting attacked. Weird little things like that. The menus in the game look really rough around the edges, given how polished the rest of the interface looks. You might get the impression that these things could have been fixed with a bit more time in the oven for the game. But really, as a complete game, Generals is still definitely one of the best Command & Conquer games that there's been yet. It has some of the most interesting units and missions in it, and just offers a lot of strategic depth, more than many previous Command & Conquer games have offered. So if you've been looking forward to Command & Conquer Generals, the good news is it was well worth the wait, and otherwise, if you're interested in real-time strategy, this is yet another really shining example of how far this genre has come, and how refined and beautiful it's turned out after all these years. Generals is just a lot of fun to play, and a really great game.